This is a video I wanted to make about a thing that I was trying to do to figure out a way around the fact that most of the things for a lot of the characters in VRChat have limited parameter slots, being only 128 bits, which at the moment the Hyenid by default normally comes about filled on that, which is part of the reason I was trying to look for something. The Hyenid's not a model I made, by the way. This is something you can find on Gumroad if you wanted to look for it. But this idea, just to emphasis on it being kind of a weird idea, this has a few issues, even though it allows for having a lot more than what would be the equivalent of having 128 booleans. You can have more than that with this idea on just one parameter that only takes up 8 bits, because you'd be using an integer. It comes with the fault of it does not sync between character loads, and in VRChat your character is reloaded every time you swap back to that character, and every single time you change worlds your character is reloaded. Your animation controller, or the layers for all your animations down here, start back at the base state and then have to go through them. This idea, though, I was able to figure out a way to make it so that it does sync as long as you are still in that same session. No longer will somebody that hasn't loaded into the world yet not see changes you made before they entered. This idea I have fixes that. My original idea that I came up with the integer does not. So if you're one of those people that for some reason has a bunch of things that they want to toggle, or possibly just find new ways of adding more things to an avatar without adding more parameters or more bits for the parameter, and you're fine with those changes not persisting between sessions, only one of them will transfer, actually, whatever number it's currently on. But I'll get more into that as I go over the idea. So before I show off how it exactly is an example of doing it, I'm going to go over the example I've currently got built in. So at the moment, for this Hyenid, I went through and changed the eyes from using the eyes by default, and the Hyenid actually came using an integer, even though I think it'd be better with Booleans to save bits. But I went ahead and reused that integer and changed it. So it starts off within the neutral state, because you got to have a base state for it to go to. So the neutral state is the eyes like this. Scroll up. But then if I change the integer, I can make it swap between the diamond, the cat, the star, and the heart. Zoom in just in case, because I don't know how it's appearing on the recording. And these are transitioned based on the integer for the eye, which I renamed to toggleInt, and I simply gave them each a number. I recommend having a little text doc somewhere in the Unity thing or in the directory that you note which one goes to what. Here I set a range. I knew that I was going to have 4 of them, so I more or less just denoted, I think it was 1 through 4. Yeah, I left 0 open, so that way if something defaults, there's nothing actually there for it to change. But how this idea works is, originally my idea simply did this. I simply checked, oh, did I change it to this number, which I would do with a button in the menu, which I'll show in a bit. And then originally it was when you had it use that number again, it would go off of it. That one doesn't sync though. So instead I came up with a more complicated measure of it only comes off of it if it is one of the numbers it should care about. This is important because it lets you use this in multiple layers without them interfering with each other. So the eyes only use essentially 1 through 5. I think I actually made eye shape neutral 5. Yeah, I think I ended up making neutral 5. So as a result, if the number is anything between 1 through 5, but not the one that it denotes that one. So basically, if it can't be 0, because I set 0 as the idea of a default that's not going to do anything. I made it so if it's 4, which is the one that goes to this one, don't do it, because I'm having it repeat going to itself here via the script that VRChat allows you to use to edit the parameter, which this is how I have it sync. I'll go over it more in a second. And then I basically set a range. You could also just note only the numbers you want it to, which is something I did in another one, such as if it's only toggling between two things, you can just only have it check for a specific number. Here, since there would be a few numbers that I'd be checking for, I decided to do a range, which is why it looks like this. You could also just note the numbers. I could have just simply put that if it wasn't 4, so if it was 1, 2, 3, and then 5, go here. And then I just changed that for each one. So that's one of the fallbacks of this idea, is it's also more complicated to set up than just setting it up with Booleans. But of course, I'm trying to find a workaround. It's probably not going to be as good as what most people are doing by default. So inherently, it's important to note actually the settings on this. So to make it slightly snappier and to also to actually make it respond properly, I don't have any exit times on the ones that go into them. I leave a transition duration of 0.25. You could probably shorten that, but you have to be careful on it because the transitions do make a difference on whether or not it can actually take an input at that time, because if it's transitioning, it's not going to be looking at your input because it's going to be moving to the next one, not acknowledging what input you've given it. So while it's on 1, though, I have it set so every time it gets to this, it calls itself essentially in the value. And this is important because I have them loop to themselves by default. And these I do have an exit time on. This is so that this basically creates a every 0.75 seconds with the 0.25 transition. So basically every 1 second, it calls itself. This is important because this is the syncing mechanism I basically made. So for you, your animation controller while you're running will be properly up to date. It's going to show whatever one you've set it to. Someone new that enters the world won't see it that way because the number's going to be whatever it's currently being, and this number changes depending on whatever thing is currently using it. So as a result, in order to get it to update for them these other settings, they have to call themselves again, which is why it's calling itself every second here. And then comes off of it, no exit time again, just a transition. And then obviously the slightly more complicated, the normal transition conditions for the exit. And I have another example, I think, for the, I edited the chest one for the Hyenid, where I changed it. Here, I think I had to actually, I might have had to actually add this one in, because they might have used a right defaults thing, which I can never get that to work. But, either way, this one is a little bit snappier and simply it does the same thing where it uses the parameter driver to call itself. I set this one 6 to remove them, and then because this is a basic one to another one, these conditions are much more basic, but still use the same transition settings when it comes to the timing, because this is the timing that I've gotten to work. Here I set it to 1, doesn't actually make a big difference. This is basically just going to be how long it how much time in between the syncs is what that ends up being. So I could go through and show an example on how to make it, and then I could show in game how this ends up looking. Just as a quick thing to show for the menu, I go back to the character and the menu. For all of these, I utilize a button. So if I go to, which one did I have it set under? I'd have to go to one where it is. So the eyes. So here, I set them all to buttons that then just toggle the integer. And as it states, the buttons are only active for a minimum of 0.2 seconds, which is the reason why you could potentially optimize the time more. At the moment, for the eyes, you have to hold the button down for longer than 1/4 of a second for it to fully complete all of its transitions to move off of going to the default state, then to the next one you've clicked. Unless you're having it go to the default eye shape, that one you only have to press the button once and you can let go of it, because it will continue holding it for the 0.2 seconds, and that's long enough for that one. Just, it's little things, but it's something that you might not actually care about if you were using it. But something that if you actually cared about making an avatar more snappy, this idea also might not work too well for that, unless you wanted to find another way of trying to make it work. So essentially, I guess I'll go and show a little example of how to set it up. let's see here. So fangs and no fangs. I could set this one up with it pretty easily. So I think I have all but, if I go to, where is it? This one, I have 6 to remove them, 7 to add them back. So 8 is my next number that's unused. I actually have a text document that I use to record them, just listing what number and which things go for it. But I haven't pulled it up at the moment, so I'm just using this because I know this was the last one I made. So here I could go through, do a thing where I basically, I recommend not using this any state thing because this is called all the time, even though my thing's also getting called often because it's constantly syncing. Anyway, so I'd have to have a default state. This one by default doesn't do anything. I'm going to change this to have things by default. So I'm going to make this the default state, and then I'm going to remove the fang transition. I'm going to set having no fangs as 8. So then I'm going to go to my toggle int equals 8, check the transition. This one should not have exit time. Make another one off of it. This one should also not have exit time, but has the 1 for 9. So you basically have to have 1 for turning it on and off, because the number can't be reused since it's going to be going to itself. And I'm just going to double check these real quick. 8, 9. Then I just have to have it transition to itself. I can leave all these, but then I have to add a behavior parameter driver, I think is what it's called. Set, for me, I called mine toggle int, and then set the value to whatever one was it, which is 8. Yes. And now I believe this works. Just to double check, I'm going to go through and look at this one, see if it's a similar setup. Equals. Yeah. So this basically means my avatar will always default to having the fangs, and only when I use this, it will remove them. Or when I press the button for it, it will remove them. So to actually make it so the button works properly, I actually need to go back and here in accessories, I think fangs is, there's fangs under body. Enable fangs. So right now this is a toggle, gotta set it to button, toggle int, 8, and that's another thing. Actually, I can't have it as simple as that because now I need a button to remove it, which is one of the whole things. Because it's not toggling, it's setting a button. Have to actually set something. So I'm going to duplicate this one, which I think I do with Control D. Rename this one fangs. Let's see here. So then I need to go to, where is it? I think it was under body. For this one, I'm going to change the fangs to instead just be fangs menu. This is not the most pretty way of doing it, but I'm just going to make something simple for it. This is actually going to be a sub menu. This should not edit anything here, and then the sub menu will be fangs. Now I gotta edit this one, which at the moment I had it set for, this is the default one for adding and removing the chest. I'm now going to change it to fangs and no fangs, and button, except now 8 is for no fangs and 9 is for fangs, I believe. Double checking, 9 and 8. Alrighty. I am now going to quickly go through and push this to the game. Alright, I think I'm back. I've gone ahead and brought it into the game. I pushed it. Just an example of showing this is the text document I have set up for being able to tell what is and isn't being used for which things, so this way it's easier to keep track, because if you're doing this, it's probably a good idea to know which ones are being used so you can use them for later, or know which one to head to later. So I'm in, I've swapped the avatar. This one was made before Fizzbones. That doesn't have anything to necessarily do with what I've got set up, but it's part of the reason that one of them doesn't work exactly as it's supposed to, but it doesn't have to do with what I've got set up. So just to show you how they work, I can go to body, eye shape, and walk a bit closer so it's easier to see. I can swap between the different eye shapes by clicking and holding, but as you'll notice, I have transitions set up so these go between them. If I try just clicking on one of them, it doesn't always do what you would think. In that case, I had caught it as it was updating on that one, so it didn't do a whole lot. But the whole thing is that, as you're noticing, even though I click star, it did not go to it. That's because due to the transition time, it only was able to go to the neutral one, which is why for the neutral one it's so responsive, because it only has to go through one thing. Whereas if I hold it, it works. Some people might want this transition ability anyway. Some people might think it looks cool. You can do that regardless of whether or not you're using this or Booleans. Just a thing. I'm not entirely sure how loud the in-game sounds are. Give me just a second. Hopefully they're not too loud. Either way, that's that for the eye shapes. And then for the chest, if I back the character up, you can see the setup I had got for being able to change that. It's not going as far back as it's supposed to because Fizzbones broke this character, but that's why I don't normally use this one. I'm just using it for testing, which, as you can see, this works. And if I go to the fangs, the one I just added, hitting it doesn't change anything because it's not there to change it. But if I go no fangs, I can then go fangs, no fangs, no fangs, fangs, and it works. But as an example, probably gonna have to blur chunks of this because I don't want to give away everything I've got set up on my thing. But if I reload this avatar, notice I'm gonna go through, set it so it's flat, no fangs, and the eyes are like this. So I have now customized 3 things with this integer. If I go through, I'm going to have to blur a good chunk of this and reload the character, which will require that I change into another one. Please ignore how much I'm going to have. This is a default one. Go back, swap to it. Only one of those changes stuck. In this case, happened to be the eyes, because the integer is only going to be one number at a time. So that's more or less just an example of how this works. It's a funny little thing I came up with just to try and add more toggles. Again, all the toggles work while you're on them, and as you'll notice, they call themselves on those, except the default ones. The default ones don't call themselves because they're the default ones. But this means that if someone were to enter the room, these 2 changes, such as the editing of the character's chest and the eyes, will be updated for someone that enters because it calls itself, and since that change happened while they were there, they'll see it. Though I won't see anything because I'm already on it. So it looks like I haven't done anything to me, but for everyone else, these changes that I've made that aren't a Boolean, which normally won't get updated for someone that newly enters, do get shown, and that was the whole thing. Either way, I'm proud of myself for coming up with this enough that I wanted to make a video about it, so if other people actually wanted to do it, they could, though I don't actually know how many people, including myself, are actually going to use this, because, to be frank, it is a little janky or finicky to get to work on some things, since again, they don't save. And you do have to do the buttons, but I'm fine with the buttons. Some people might not be, some people also might just be. So either way, I'm rambling. Hopefully you if you watched this far, hopefully you thought the idea was cool enough that I'm not going to look real stupid for making this video. But either way, hopefully you thought it was cool.